Hello everyone, this is Venom Geek Media here, and today, well, I wanted to talk about the Avenger class, but I'm doing this rant video instead. Hopefully it won't be too long. One of my commanders, Rella, he requested that I did a ship chat about the Avenger class from STO, and because I have no culture, I could not tell the difference initially between the Inquiry and the Avenger class. I just, in fairness, in STO, they are literally just a reskin. So, blame STO for that. So I, got in touch with the boys over at the 4th Combined Fleet. We did a photo shoot that involved the Avenger class. None of them have the Inquiry because it's a lockbox. As I was going through and looking at the pictures that we were taking of the Avenger, I realized how nice of a design it was. And I also realized at the same time just how bad and baffling a design the Inquiry is. Now, some of them are design problems, some of them are scaling problems, there's a lot of aesthetic problems. We're going to break them down one by one because this thing is just a box of issues. Aside from its original appearance in Season 1 of Picard, where it appears in the copy-paste fleet, which of course is a whole thing in and of itself, but the ship itself, it's not terrible, but it's incredibly confusing. That's what I want to say. It's a very confused design. So it's worth mentioning that it was designed by John Eves, and it was based on some unused designs for Star Trek 2009. That's why it looks so similar to the Avenger class. The Avenger class came out way back in STO, like in 2014. It was a very early STO design. I think it came out basically the same time as the Odyssey class, which is pretty early in STO. So, the Avenger predates the Inquiry as a design, but the Inquiry is using the same concept art, but then is set in the timeline earlier, which just confuses the entire thing. Okay, the first thing to talk about is scaling and proportions. That's a huge problem with the Inquiry class. You see, it is scaled at 630 meters. It's gigantic. That's huge. And when you look at it, you say, oh, okay, so it's about Galaxy class size-ish, which is not completely unreasonable for the period that it's in, but then equally, look at its proportions. Can you honestly say, especially because it only appears among its own kind in that scene, it's only with other ships of its kind. So, really gauging scale, if there was a Galaxy class in that scene, people would think it was ridiculous. If you look at a comparison chart with it next to a Galaxy, Sovereign, or Ross class, which are all properly scaled for their size, you will see that the Inquiry is incredibly awkward and chunky. It's a very, very chunky ship. And in that way, it means that it feels a bit off, because why is it so chunky? When you get to the size of being like a Galaxy class, you don't need to have a particularly chunky build, because all the proportions have been scaled up. So that's why bigger ships are generally sleeker, and when you make smaller ships, that's where the chunkiness comes out, because you're having to fit more into a smaller profile. Another issue I will immediately raise, because it does confuse the scaling matter, is what are these on the sides? So on the side of the saucer, there are these big glowing windows? Question mark? Possibly, possibly not. We don't know. They don't say. But they are bigger. They are about twice the size of the other windows on this ship. They're either 2-deck gallery-sized windows, which seems just ridiculous. So the problem we have here is that we have two different scale of windows. We have the windows of the main saucer, if those are windows indeed, and then we have the windows on the rest of the ship, and those are the windows which put it up at 630 meters. But they're so dim. You look at some other ships, and they have very visible windows that are very definite indications of scale. But the windows on the Inquiry are incredibly dim, so it's very difficult to even see them, and that's why people are going to initially be calling scale off of the more kind of visible bright windows on the rim of the saucer, even if those aren't, even if those are actually like sensor palettes or something, but they look like windows, and they drown out what would be windows. I mean, that's the thing. If you wanted to get a definite size, a proper sense of scale, what you'd do is you'd look at the saucer rim, and you say, okay, how many decks is in the saucer rim? And you'd then go from there. That's a standard practice, how many decks you want to be at the edge of the saucer, and that then will define how many decks the rest of the ship is capable of having. I should also note, while it does have phaser arrays, again, actually look at the phaser arrays. Those are very oversized phaser arrays proportionally. If this is the same size as a Galaxy class, look at the size of the Galaxy class's phaser arrays. Now look at the size of the inquiries. Now some idiot is going to say, but bigger phasers is better. And it's like, but it breaks up a kind of a rule of scaling that has existed for a very long time. We know what size a phaser array or a phaser battery is. And that's another little visual reference point which helps us, square away in our subconscious how big this ship is. Then let's talk about the bridge module. So you have the bridge module, which itself is quite awkward. It's a very towering... Most of the ship's hull is very flat. And then we get this very towering bridge module, especially when you compare it to the Avenger class, which is very compact, and I'll do a proper video on the Avenger class, because originally this video was going to be a ship chat mostly about the Inquiry, but as I looked at the Avenger and how much better it was, I just got more frustrated with this thing and didn't want to give it the dues of a proper ship chat. But on the Avenger, that bridge section is very flush to the hull, a bit like the Defiant. It's meant to be built sort of inspired by the Defiant and by the Nova, those sort of more compact and protected designs. But instead, it's gone for this very noticeable bridge tower, and then actually there's like several sub-decks, and the bridge is very, very much at the very top of the ship. But it's just a very awkward bridge design, and it doesn't do a great job of defining where the bridge is exactly and how big it is, what the scale is. You could have a couple of different scales based on that bridge design alone, and that's kind of part of the problem. With the original concept art for 2009, John Hughes was probably thinking about a smaller ship. Essentially, on Star Trek 2009, the production artists were bang on. They did all the things right, and then JJ just came in, I'm going to make it bigger though, because it looks cool. Because JJ. Anyway, another problem you have with the Inquiry is did you know it has a prow shuttle bay? I didn't know, but it does. Look at it. That's a shuttle bay right there. But for some reason, again, actually, it's not the only one guilty of this. The Akira does the same problem. The shuttle bay doors are unnecessarily small. You actually, even at 600 meters, you actually can't get much in the way of shuttlecraft out that front door. Basically, Valkyrie class fighters, that's about it. So it's not really very usable. And again, you look at it, it's kind of disproportionate with that aft shuttle bay. I mean, you look there, you've got the aft shuttle bay, which must be just absolutely cavernous. It must be huge, because you've got this full clamshell door setup that makes up a fair portion of the tail of the Inquiry. And so that must be just a gigantic shuttle bay if this is the forward shuttle bay, and we can see is indicated to run about 3 decks. For some reason, they don't want it to run for a 4th deck because, I don't know, reasons? I mean, look at the impulse engines on the back as well. Does that really fit with something that is 600 meters long? Those would be gigantic for a 600 meter long ship. And you might say, well, it's faster. It's obviously faster. Well, yes, but even the Sovereign, which is a fast ship, they do a better job of incorporating that into the structure and making it all flush and neat and tidy and graceful. Essentially, what I'm trying to get across is that the proportions of the Inquiry don't communicate the size that it's claiming to be. it hardly looked like the most advanced ship Starfleet had put out. And it isn't, because it's actually reusing a whole bunch of parts. The nacelles, those are sort of Intrepid-style nacelles, or Intrepid/Nova-style nacelles. They are not new nacelles by any means. I mean, you look at the Enterprise F, the Odyssey class, which we'll probably see in Season 3 very soon. And those do not look nearly as advanced as what we see on the Odyssey class. So, yeah, it breaks up the Starfleet aesthetic and doesn't conform. So I did come up with a revised size. I'm still not 100% happy with it though. But essentially, if you up the size of the prow shuttle bay and accept that it's basically a utility shuttle bay, you can get it down to about 490 meters long. That's still quite big, and it still feels quite awkward, and scaling it approximately to how the Avenger is in STO, which is about 390 meters, it means that the Inquiry still feels a bit oversized and a bit anachronistic. These are two ships that are kind of... okay, they aren't distinctly related to each other in terms of components, but they are in terms of design language. There's a lot of shared design language between the Inquiry and the Avenger, but having the Inquiry come before and be so big really confuses that lineage. And also, it's like, what even is the Inquiry? Is it a science ship? Is it a warship? It's unclear. It doesn't communicate anything very well. It doesn't even have photon torpedo launchers. I mean, I have an idea that you would replace that prow shuttle bay with a photon torpedo, a series of photon torpedo launchers, but then that just runs the question of, okay, well then what's the point of this prow shuttle bay to begin with, especially because you've still got that cavernous clamshell shuttle bay at the back. You can see my frustration. So, what do we take from this? Well, be very careful about how you deploy your concept art. I think it's fine to kind of reuse concept art. John Hughes has done it a lot, and I think it's done very well. For example, his Klingon Warbird, but the Klingon battlecruiser that has a brief appearance in Star Trek 2009, that actually is a pretty good design, but he based that off of his D4, which never made it into Enterprise because it didn't have enough windows, whatever. And then equally, that some of that concept also made it into Tobias Richter's D6. So there's a common design language between these three vessels, but you're not going to instantly confuse them. They have distinct identities, and they fit into distinct eras, and they scale reasonably well with one another, although maybe not the Klingon Warbird. That's I don't know, because JJ did funny things with scale, and I will get onto that. And I think that's perhaps the problem. I think what happened with the Inquiry is they designed a ship first and then scaled it later. You might think you can do that. Oh, it just depends on the size of the windows, right? If we put, smaller or bigger windows on it, that will dictate how big that ship is. And it's like, well, yes, strictly speaking, yes. But it confuses the design language. Like I say, if something is smaller, it's going to be chunkier because it's got to take up more space proportional to fit components in. Why is the Galaxy class so smooth and sweeping and curvy and elegant and graceful? It's because it's so fucking huge. It's massive. Same thing with the Dideridex. Why is the Dideridex so graceful and sleek? Because it's a massive ship. Why is the Votchar sort of got more greebling and details and superstructure and, additional shapes? Why is it not so clean and flowing? Well, because it's a smaller ship. That's kind of what's being implied to you, the audience, when you're looking at it. Same thing with the Galor. That has lots of kind of superstructure and chunk to it, where you can visibly tell sort of where one section of hull ends and another begins, where one deck ends and another begins, whereas in something as vast as the Galaxy class, it nicely flows because of, it's sort of that economy of scale. But unfortunately, the people who were putting together the Inquiry and doing that final scale job didn't think that part through. I mean, did the Inquiry need to be 630 meters long? Not really, no. I mean, what's it facing off against? Some boring Romulan I'm not even going to call them warbirds. They're not. They're pathetic. They're tiny ships for Romulan. It didn't have to be a galaxy-class sized vessel. And in fact, actually, I don't think the intention was. I mean, certainly, again, because you have them as this clone fleet, you're not selling it to me as a galaxy-class sized vessel. You're selling it to me as this, small, mass-producible platform. And so then, even then, you're kind of creating for yourself storytelling problems. You're creating universe problems. Because when you then come into introducing other ships that are perhaps smaller, well, it's like, well, why would you when you can just print out these huge galaxy-class sized, ships like the Inquiry? And it's like, well, because it was never meant to be that big. It was never meant to be that big. So, what are my thoughts on the Inquiry? I like it. It's not an irredeemable design. That's got very good points going on. I like the reuse of the Voyager style nacelles, of those sort of Nova style nacelles. Those work very well in terms of giving us an indication of when it's from. I think that works very nicely. Make up your mind on the bridge superstructure. Either it stays or it goes. And yeah, I'd say get rid of that forward shuttle bay. It's useless. Put a photon torpedo launcher in, or several photon torpedo launchers there instead. I mean, and when I scaled it down to 490 meters, I did that so that the prow shuttle bay could still be somewhat useful. But if we could get shot of that, you could scale it down to a much more reasonable size, and then have the Avenger come in as its successor and be very, very reasonable. So yeah, that's my conclusion. Ultimately, it's not an irredeemable design, but clearly the Avenger class is the better thought out design. I think the designers at STO, possibly because they weren't being so rushed, but again, if your production for your TV show is being rushed, there's someone's to blame for that. As much as there are problems with STO, they don't often put out a ship that is of low quality. All their ship models are excellent and kind of a gold standard, and it's just funny how that's gone from the shows used to produce the models to which everything else was the standard, and now it's this online multiplayer game which is supplying the TV show with models. How times change, I guess. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed that rant. So yes, Rella, don't worry. I will do a proper look at the Avenger class. I love it. It's so cute. It's an adorable little attack dog. And yeah, more kind of regular ship chats on the way. I just needed to vent this because it just became, the longer I sat and I looked at this, and the longer, and I was like, this does not work. This does not work. So yes, I'm pleased to say that I will be getting back to ships that do work. Some just genuine STO designs which are stunning. Not every STO design lands, but sometimes they do, and they really, really land. And I've got a couple of those coming up. So I'll see you guys then. I hope you enjoyed. Leave your thoughts in the comments below, and I will see you all in the next video.